Hi, I'm Justine.
And I'm Sarah Levon.
And we are so glad you're here.
We believe that your life has the potential to make a deep, meaningful impact on the world around you. You, as a nurse, have the ability to add value to every single person and patient you touch.
We want to inspire you with resources, education, and stories to support you to live your absolute best life, both in and outside of work.
But don't expect perfection over here. We're just here to have some conversations about anything birth, work, and life, trying to add some happy to your hour as we all grow together.
By nurses, for nurses, this is Happy Hour with Bundle Birth Nurses. Welcome back to an episode of Happy Hour with Bundle Birth Nurses. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how to do things, the right way to do things. And I was inspired to bring this up because on my unit, we have a lot of new grads at night. You probably relate. And a lot of new nurses. And I had an interaction with a nurse when starting an IV. She was very concerned that I was going to be upset about the way that she set up the supplies when I went a different way to draw blood. And I was like, oh, it's totally fine. And I'm a little bit unique in that I always joke that I'm not A type or B type. I'm Z type. So I have zero preferences. I didn't even correlate with the Z and zero. But whatever way, it gets the job done. It's not unsafe, whatever. I don't care. But I do know people do have some preferences. And so I wanted to have a conversation about, even though you think your way is the best way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only right way to do something. Some examples will be with fetal monitoring. I went to an advanced fetal monitoring class a few years ago, and the instructor said that we can chart contractions 2 in 10 or 3 in 10 instead of every 2 to 3 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes. And my whole life was oh my, so much easier.
So much easier.
I don't have to count those minutes between the contractions. Obviously, if there's 5 in 10, I want to look a little closer to see if there's resting period between those contractions. But for a 2 in 10, a 3 in 10, I know the baby's getting perfused between, so I'm not concerned. But if someone sees that, I always actually in the back of my head, if someone's sitting next to me while I'm charting, I'm they're going to see this and be you're wrong. And I'm going to have to prepare for no, I got taught this in class.
Right.
And so, but that's just one example of probably many that it's not. Go ahead, you say it.
It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different.
And that's a little catchphrase here that Sarah has. Did you make that up? I can't remember.
No, that's an Equa from growing up in Ecuador. It was our team, our team meaning my parents' work team. But we were all very close. And living cross-culturally, there's a lot of things that especially I was a kid, so it's different for a kid because you're kind of learning these things. But I would hear that growing up when particularly expats, so expatriate is anybody living outside their passport country. That could be U.S. in Ecuador, that could be China in Ecuador, or Vietnam, or anywhere in Europe in Ecuador. That when you're in a different culture, that things are new, and you're tempted, especially if you've been raised a certain way, to go oh no, that's wrong, that's not the right way. And so in order to cope with how much of that was so different, I would hear, I think it was probably my parents, but it came from somewhere in that it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. Sort of as a coping mantra for don't judge. If it gets the job done, it's just different, and I do appreciate the fact that I grew up there as a part of helping me kind of carry that into my everyday life all the time. Mind you, I'm pretty particular about a lot of things. But in the back of my mind, I feel I always follow up with well, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. Or it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different.
I know, and I think right and wrong might be better for them to think of.
Yeah, either way. But better or worse, it's the same idea that if I'm I need to set up the IV this way, it's better that way. Yeah. And for me, actually, if I think about myself, better is definitely better for me, because in my mind, I'm that's more efficient. That's this and that. Prove me wrong, but I'm right. Right. And I struggle with that for sure.
No, yeah,
she's laughing
very different in that sense.
Yeah.
Another example could be, and we still need to do a whole podcast episode on this, is if you're a preceptor, you were taught that as soon as their water breaks, your patient water breaks, they can't be upright.
Yep. Or that you need to check them immediately.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So it's not bad, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different. So if you come into contact with a nurse that finds out that her patient ruptured and she goes into the room and you go with her And she's like, oh, that's great. And she cleans her up. She puts some underwear on her and be like, do you want to stand now? Sometimes standing is better to help manage the contractions. They might come on stronger now.
And in fact, by the way, you should probably get them up to help the head apply on the cervix and keep them progressing and avoid the cord prolapse, hopefully. Not that you can necessarily avoid it if the cord's there, but otherwise then it helps labor forward and actually helps the baby engage and use the SROM or the SROM to help.
SROM. SROM. I know somebody said that.
It's SROM. See, I'm right.
Someone
messaged better to say SROM.
Someone said they say SROM. They say
no, it's
SROM.
SROM.
And someone said SROM, SROM, or SROM.
Oh.
And someone messaged and they were like, SROM just sounds so nerdy to me. Prove me wrong.
That was probably me that said that.
But it makes sense. SROM makes sense because P-prom, right? I don't say prom.
I would sometimes say prom. I would say prom for premature rupture of membranes, but preterm premature rupture of membranes, I'd say P-prom.
Yeah, I guess I say prom too, like she prommed.
Yeah.
What? I don't know what it is.
I mean,
it's like East Coast, West Coast thing.
East Coast, West Coast, that's like you're complete or
Tupac
you're fully. Like, it's right, guys. Complete is right. But that leads to the exact
Oh, that's
thing.
an exact example. It's not right. It's not wrong.
Exactly.
It's just different.
But it is right.
So this episode is just to encourage you to like remember that it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different, and maybe put that into your head for the first time, and to also encourage you to think like maybe you didn't learn everything on preceptorship, or you didn't learn everything on the unit you started on, because there's many things that I didn't know years into my practice. I'm thinking about when I went to the childbirth educator class and I was like, I know nothing. You know?
What do you mean you knew nothing?
I can't give you specifics now, but I remember sitting there being like, I am so undereducated. Like, even about like what labor really was. I think it was the first time someone told me that the definition of labor is contractions making cervical change.
Oh, I remember the moment in my career when I had that epiphany. I can tell you exactly where I was. I'd been a nurse for a minute, and I was explaining labor and probably drawing the little thing I draw in mentorship on the board and going, oh, that's why Braxton hicks are Braxton hicks and why they can be painful. Because
why? Tell me.
Labor, by definition, is when your cervix changes with contractions. So you can have contractions with no cervical change. That's not labor. Those are Braxton Hicks contractions, regardless how painful they are. So I had that epiphany of like, oh, it's the combination. And like, if the cervix isn't changing, then they're not in labor, which is why we send them home. Oh.
So there is examples of things we still don't know. And so when a nurse or a provider does something that you don't necessarily understand, I wouldn't be so quick to judge of being like, that's not right, until you know that's not right.
Well, and for whether you're new or you're experienced listening to this episode, like I think for us experienced nurses, it's sort of like this is a prompt to like when you're finding yourself in that moment going like, ugh, why are they doing what? Oh, this is me. By the way, even at the bedside, like I act like I'm not watching you as a nurse, but I'm definitely watching. And I constantly have to check myself to be like, it doesn't matter. And the question, the prompt for you when you find yourself being like, oh, no, you should do it this way is, does it get the job done, right? And is it safe? Because if it's safe and it's getting the job done, who cares how it's done? I love the example we talked about prior to this, which was the Foley. Like some people set up the Foley kit between their legs and some put it on a bedside table. Who cares? You know, I may have my rationale of why I do it between their legs, and you'll probably have your rationale about why you do it on the table, but you know, and maybe that prompts a conversation, but sort of like, I think as a new nurse, you think like, oh, there's this like very cookie cutter way to being the best nurse, when you get to develop your practice. I have a practice that I carry out now, especially in like the various roles that I carry. You, Justine, have a practice of how you are. You're Mrs. Zero. What did you call yourself? Zero. You're an A type zero. Thank you.
Z.
You're type Z.
I was like, what?
Whoa, that was really not right. But you get the idea. You're type Z in terms of like, you're like, meh. Like you have a practice of being very nonchalant. Me, when I was at the bedside, it was like when there was emergencies, I'd be like, okay, wham, bam. Or I'd joke that I become a dictator. I'm like, I get very like to the point, and you do this, dot, 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 wah, bah. And my adrenaline, yes, it increases, but it's not, I don't get frantic. I really like that challenge. So as you're developing your practice, for those of you experienced, check yourself when you're judging and say, is it safe and does it work? And if it does, let them be. I think that's also where like new nurses are vulnerable and they're insecure, and you feel overwhelmed and you want to do it right. And when there's constantly all these different cooks in the kitchen telling you all the things that you should or shouldn't be doing, it's hard to know. And it's also hard to develop your practice. And we're here to tell you, you get to develop your practice. Watch how other nurses do things. Look at how, the blood draw, if you pull from the line or you pull from and don't pull from your like IV line that's infusing, especially with medications, that's a no-no. But like if you're starting an IV, you can connect the vacutainer or you pull from the saline lock. Yeah. And so either way, like it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different. And then you decide what works for me. I personally use a vacutainer. I like a vacutainer. It works for me. I know how to tamponade the IV, but maybe that feels overwhelming to you. And is it safe? Yeah. Does it get the job done? Yeah. Like you get to decide along the way what works for you. Try out different methods. I'll never forget, maybe this totally doesn't apply, but I'm having a flashback to a moment early on in my career when I saw the nurse just throw the linens on the floor and thinking like, why aren't they in the linen little holder machine, the little basket thing? And then I remember being like, oh, one time you're in practice, you're kind of like, who cares if they throw it on the floor? You throw it on the floor to get it out of the way because you only have one hand and you're still trying to hold the whatever you're trying to hold. And
that's so funny.
Then you pick it up later.
Like you like even noticed it.
Oh, so clear as day. And I remember thinking like, that's not right. That's like, you're making a mess.
And you might think she's the worst nurse because like she's lazy. She's just throwing it on the ground.
She's just throwing it on the ground.
So that's insightful for the new nurses listening to this. Like, yes, the experienced nurses need to have grace with you, but you as a new nurse need to know that like real life is not school. Real life is not Lippincott. It's not your Taylor skills. It is real life, and you'll learn these. So you'll learn
and find that is it right or wrong or different? Is it safe? Yeah, because it's on the floor for 1 second and then you're going to pick it up and put it away. Mm-hmm. But like, I can think about and it's so funny now that I'm thinking about it, like the number of times, even currently, I throw things on the floor and I have to like mentally be like, it's okay. I need to go to therapy. But like, it's sort of that like, may seem scrappy, but there's probably a reason for it. It's the same kind of benefit of the doubt we give a patient. I know, but you do what you got to do, and it's not right or wrong. And anybody who's telling you it's right or wrong, question it in your mind with, well, is it safe? And does it get the job done? Then yes. And then the question might become, well, is there a more efficient way to do some of these things, and ask the question when you see something done differently, instead of going, oh, what's that? It's can you explain to me why you chose to do this? I do it this way. Is there another way that you can think of that might be more efficient, might be more whatever,
fill in the blank? Critical thinking.
Totally. And then that nurse that's doing the thing that you think is dumb might go, oh, how do you do it? And they may have just never seen it done another way. And then they go, oh, well, that's actually, I like that more. So now I'm going to try this way. This is how we build each other up and how we grow together to be more fill in the blank, proficient, efficient, safe, not wasteful in our resource management.
And less like judgy.
So much less judgy, guys. Let's be less judgy.
Also, too, it might be just like a no-brainer, but also like, what does the patient want?
Totally.
Like, I'm thinking of starting an IV while standing. I did it to a patient the other day. I do it a lot in triage, actually. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the nurses that come in are like, oh my, I make a mess. If the IV is, if they're standing, it is a mess. My supplies, it's just out of my norm for the most part. And so I always feel bad when they come back and I'm like, okay, here's your patient. And I'm looking back. It's like a war.
Yeah.
But the patient wanted to stand and I could do the IV standing. It's safe.
And who cares? A little bit of blood. So I actually got an IV the other day. I paid for it, guys. It was legal. But it's just been so hot here and I was feeling really behind. And so I was like, maybe I'll feel better if I'll get some IV fluid. So I went in and she literally had that same thing. Because after she started it, she's like, you're so chill. Like, you didn't even like, criticize or like, I'm sorry it took me a second. And I was like, girl, I'm a nurse. I know how to. She was like, you are? She's like, I had a nurse yesterday and he was horrible to me that he just like, and she was standing when she started the IV and he was like, you need to sit, you need to this and that. Like, especially with IVs, my rule when I would precept was like, first of all, you need to do it how you feel like you do it. You bring the bed up, you leave the bed down. I would always get on their level, and I felt like I couldn't do it standing with 2 feet. I'd have to kneel, actually.
Well, I'm talking about the patient was standing.
You know, I know. It's just sort of like along the same example. Yeah, like I bring the bed down and then I would like kneel to stabilize myself. And then the other trick with IVs is totally a bonus is that I will swear till the end of my life is that you actually have to believe you're going to get it. Oh, yeah, the moment you doubt yourself, you miss it. And I like my track record for that is like 100%. And even if I'm starting to doubt myself, I'm like, no, I'm going to get this IV. I got it. You know, and it totally shifts like your capability to do your IV. Don't ask me why. But anyway, so I was getting this IV done and she said, the guy was like, yeah, I'm a nurse and you needed this and that. And she was like, I've started a few. Like, this is my job. Right. You know, like what are you supposed to do? But like how horrible, you know, and then she's venting to me about how that made her feel. And I'm like, I'm so sorry you felt that way. She's like, thanks for being so easy. I'm like, easy? How am I going to tell you how to do your job? I don't care. Just get it done. Right. You know, and she got my IV, 1 poke. I barely felt it. It worked. And that's all. It doesn't have to be so layered.
All in all, it's not right. It's not wrong. It's just different. Or it's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. And take this idea into your head when you're with other nurses and you're seeing them perform skills or do something different than you instead of maybe judging them.
Thanks for spending your time with us during this episode of Happy Hour with Bundleberg Nurses. If you liked what you heard, it helps us both if you subscribe, rate, and leave a raving review and share this episode with a friend. If you want more from us, head to bundlebergnurses.com or follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Now it's your turn to take what you learned today and apply it to your life, giving honorable, non-judgmental care to every single patient you care for and every nurse that you interact with. We'll see you next time.